Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to review the Clone Wars cartoon, which just ended its 7th season, and technically the last one, because the Clone War is over. The last episode takes place during and after Revenge of the Sith. So I want to review the last episode and also my general opinion on the whole show, and also the original Clone Wars cartoon, which was a lot shorter and the episodes were really short, but I think I enjoyed that one more. I think it had its own style, it was very artistic, it was kind of over the top epic in a good way, in a funny way. And because the episodes were really short, it had very good pacing, there was no filler, everything was action packed and epic. So in my opinion it was better that way, and also the way everything looked also, in my opinion, I just like that kind of style more, even though it's more of a contradiction with the movies, because the things we see the Jedi do in that old cartoon was much overpowered compared to anything in the movies, and even more than Rey in the new movies. So continuity wise maybe it's a problem. And speaking of continuity, I liked how this new Clone Wars show didn't contradict the old one. I was expecting that in the last episodes of this season, of season 7, they will do their own version of what happened before the movie and during the movie, and it will contradict what we saw in that older Clone Wars, which tied directly into Revenge of the Sith in the end. And they didn't do that. Instead, they followed the story of Ahsoka and Darth Maul and all kinds of things which are unrelated to the main events of the movie. Unlike that older cartoon, which showed the main heroes and what they're doing up until the moment of the movie. And so I'm glad they didn't retcon that. This way both of those shows can be canon, they can fit together, even though there are some slight problems. But overall we can put it all together in order and it will make sense and not contradict itself. The only part which is kind of iffy is Anakin's eye scar, the way he got it in that cartoon, and the time of that was slightly problematic with continuity in this one, but we can make up excuses for that. So in short, I like that this new show didn't contradict the older one, and we can still consider that one canon as well. And this last episode of the Clone Wars cartoon was pretty good in terms of action, the way everything looked, the special effects, and all the stuff that's happening is kind of epic, even though it's not related to the main story of Star Wars. It's all about these side characters, but we find out what happens to them, where it all leads to. It also ties to that other cartoon, Rebels, which I didn't watch. I remember trying to watch it and I couldn't. It was kind of too childish, at least in the beginning. But I watched some clips of it on YouTube, and I think they're also tying with that. And so they're paying attention to the details, trying to tie things together, not to contradict anything. And I enjoyed the action scenes in this one. It was kind of cool, and I wish they would have done stuff like that in the movies. Like some of the stuff they showed us here, like the spaceship crashing to a planet and people jumping out and going into smaller aircraft, and all of that was really well done. I guess it's one of the advantages of making a cartoon, because you can do a lot more crazy stuff that it's harder to do in movies and to make it look realistic. But in cartoons you can do it more over the top and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons I liked that older cartoon, because they showed all kinds of crazy stuff that I can't really imagine in movies, unless it's a comedy movie, I guess, because it would just look ridiculous even if it's done well in terms of special effects. It's just too over the top. If you do it with actors it would look cartoony, but if it's a cartoon it's okay. And so I really liked those kinds of crazy stuff in the cartoons. So I think the last episode was pretty good. I wouldn't call it perfect, but it was nice. The rest of the season wasn't that good in my opinion, and in general this series might have been a little bit too long, because a lot of stuff just became repetitive. It became kind of boring, the same kind of action scenes. Like, how many times can we watch people using a lightsaber to deflect a laser bolt? I remember how cool it all looked in the prequels when we saw that kind of stuff for the first time. I really loved it. It was very different from anything we saw in any other action movie and stuff, so it was new and interesting and visually spectacular. And in the cartoons they kept doing that for years to come, and after a while I think it just got boring. Like, I cannot watch that anymore. I'm not entertained by that anymore, to see laser bolts being deflected by lightsabers, by the Jedi. I'm just kind of tired of that. And so this is one of the flaws, you can say, of this show, that the action scenes and all of that become kind of repetitive and boring after a while. So I think maybe the show should have been shorter and not so drawn out. And also one of the things that disappoint me personally about it is the missed opportunity, because I always thought Star Wars could use a good TV show to really develop the galaxy of Star Wars to really show what's going on and maybe deal with some science fiction ideas which the movies never dealt with. And it's one of the reasons that I personally prefer Star Trek over Star Wars, because even though Star Wars usually had better special effects and were more spectacular and epic and had cool scenes of people dueling each other and stuff like that, so Star Wars, I can understand why it can be more entertaining, but I personally found Star Trek much more interesting, especially in the shows, because the shows gave it the time to develop actually complicated stories and to explore all kinds of science fiction ideas, and I found that much more interesting than the special effects and the action scenes in Star Wars, which were very entertaining, but it doesn't really leave you anything to think about, so it's not as interesting long term. And I always say that if Star Wars is doing a TV show, it will give it the opportunity to maybe explore some similar kind of stories and ideas like Star Trek did in the shows. And sadly, I don't think they really did. I mean, they did develop characters better, they did go into more detail character-wise, and even in the action scene itself, like it had all kinds of different situations which were fun to play with. But they didn't really do a more Star Trek kind of show in which they actually deal with topics or encounter any kind of new ideas, science fiction ideas or cultural ideas or political stuff. They did it a little bit with the whole thing about the Republic and the Empire and all of that. They did do that more in the show, but it's not really that interesting. Star Wars was always much more simplistic compared to Star Trek. And maybe some people would prefer it, some people hate politics. I remember all the complaints in the prequels about all the Senate scenes, which I personally liked. I have no problem to listen a little bit about the politics of Star Wars, but most people hate that, and so maybe that's why they avoided it. Also, Star Wars is considered to be aimed more at kids, but I think maybe people make the mistake of considering all kids simpletons who wouldn't understand more complicated topics and ideas. I don't think that's correct. I remember watching Star Trek when I was 7 years old and liking it and understanding it despite Star Trek going into all those so-called boring topics. I still liked it, so I think they could have done more of that and have all the action as well. I'm not saying you should give up the action and have scenes of characters sitting at the table discussing some political topic. You can do both of them, and I think the action scenes will be more interesting if you understand the stakes of them, if you understand what the conflict is really about, and you would be rooting for one side against the other, or if the story would be about finding some kind of solution, compromise, like Star Trek often did. That would also be very educational for the kids watching. But Star Wars, it's about the wars, it's about the action and conflict, and so that's one of the reasons I prefer Star Trek, and I think a lot of kids also would if you gave them the chance. I don't think it's fair to simply consider all the kids simpletons who wouldn't understand complicated topics, so just give them action scenes to entertain them and that's it. I think it was a missed opportunity. I think the show could have done more educational and complex, interesting topics, and maybe some science fiction, and not just the action adventure element, which again was fun, but I want some science fiction, I want some politics, I want some debates about a topic, I want to see different kinds of cultures, maybe to see some primitive planets or more advanced planets. They do that a little bit in Star Wars, but usually in Star Wars everyone on the same level of technology, and it's all about all these wars and all of that. And so I always think Star Trek was more interesting because it had a variety of different kinds of stories. It wasn't just the same story again and again like in Star Wars, and it's one of the reasons Star Wars is becoming kind of boring. The same problem in the sequels, they just did the same kind of story again, exactly the same, an empire against the rebels, and that's it. So how many times can we see that before we find it boring? So it became old pretty fast, and even the action scenes themselves, seeing lightsabers deflecting laser bolts, I think I saw enough of that, and it's no longer entertaining. And it's coming from someone who loved all the action scenes in the prequels. The prequels had a lot of problems, but when they came out, the special effects were amazing for the time, and I loved all the action scenes in them. Even, episode 2, when it came out, I thought it's the best movie ever. I was a teenager back then, and the action scenes were amazing for the time. And so it's coming from me who loved all that stuff, and we get a lot more of that in this cartoon. But we get so much of it that it really becomes kind of boring after a while. So that's my honest opinion about this topic. I wish they would have added more variety of stories and action scenes and used the opportunity to have more screen time to do something more than that. And we did have some episodes of that, like I remember that episode about Yoda going to some planet where he learned about how to become a forest ghost and all of that. That was interesting. It was kind of fantasy, but it was still, it was different from the normal episodes, so that at least felt like something new, and also it tied up all the loose ends from the movies, it explained some things. So I remember I liked those episodes, and so the show did do that kind of stuff once in a while, but usually it was just the action scenes of the war, and it was so repetitive I found it boring after a while. And then I started to just kind of skim through the episodes to kind of skip some of that stuff. And even the story of Anakin, you know, his fall to the dark side and all of that, also I thought when you do a show about that, you have more opportunity to really do it properly, not like in the movie, which was like 2 minutes and he's the bad guy suddenly, which was ridiculous. Instead, you can do it more gradually, you know, like Breaking Bad and shows like that about someone who falls to the dark side in a believable way. So the show did do that a little bit, but again, not really enough, not really clever enough in my opinion. I thought it could have been better, so I think there were a lot of missed opportunities, but it was still overall mostly an entertaining show, so I cannot really complain too much about it. I definitely remember a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool scenes, so I'm not saying it's terrible, but it could have been better in my opinion. And you know, at least that older Clone Wars cartoon, at least it didn't waste your time, it just showed you the most epic stuff right away, and it didn't have any filler. It was never boring for a second, because it was action-packed all the way, and epic all the way, and so I still think I kind of prefer that one and the style of it, even though in the new one, you know, there's so many episodes, you can probably pick a lot more cool stuff from it. It's kind of an unfair comparison. So I think that's all I had to say about it for today. So is it worth watching? I guess if you really love all that kind of stuff I mentioned, if you really love to see all the lightsaber duels and the fights, the battles and all of that, you really enjoy that kind of stuff, then you might enjoy the cartoons. The special effects in the cartoon itself, I think, got better over time. That last episode that I just watched did have some epic scenes, which you can almost look at it like a movie, like all the stuff with the spaceships. Looks really good and cool and all of that, and so if you really enjoy all that kind of stuff, you will probably enjoy the show. But I personally, I miss, you know, that old science fiction kind of shows with actual stories, with actual dilemmas, with complicated topics to debate about, like the older Star Trek shows and the Stargate and all the shows like that. I really miss that old good science fiction. So that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.